Hello, everyone. Seems like we are live now. Hey, Kent. Hey, Harold.
Hey, Wagner. Hey, Kent.
Hello, everyone.
Cool. So welcome to Logic Apps Live, October 2024, like our second to last session. So let's go and take a look at our agenda. So Kent, can you move around? Yeah. So as usual, we're going to be talking about the Ace Aviator of the month. So we're going to highlight the people that is helping us with on the community. We're going to be talking about some of the recent events that we saw throughout the last month. And then we have a couple for the product announcements. Harold is here talking about XML operations that is coming public preview now. So quite exciting, especially for people with legacy components. And Kent is also talking about hybrid deployments, which also went in public review last week, if I'm not wrong, right? On top of that, right, so if you don't think that it's legacy that is happening today, we also have some really interesting AI use cases. Then, as usual, ask your questions on the chat, and we're going to try to answer as much as we can during that time. So let's go to the next one. Every month we talk about we try to highlight one of the people that is helping with the community, putting some content there and good information and helping us around the spending logic apps. And this month we have Prashant Singh, which is a cloud solution architect at HP, right? One of the things that he talks about that he really finds interesting on how he wants to live is he talks about the allegory of long spools. That's one of his favorite stories, and he talks about we feed each other in heaven, right? So that idea of we learning from each other and growing from helping each other is quite important for him. And a tip that he has for throughout his career is instead of trying to memorize things, actually practice and keep it trying to find things from experience. So, Prashant, thank you so much for helping us again on the Logic Apps community. And let's see who's coming next next month as Ace Aviator. Next one, Kent. So, if you joined us last month, we saw that instead of our usual Logic Apps Live, we actually had a full day of community engagement, right? So the Logic Apps Community Day run in October. We probably have about 5 hours of content from 12 sessions from different community members. And we have everyone in the spectrum from new people to public speaking to veteran MVPs and a whole lot of different types of sessions as well. We have lightning sessions, and some sessions was really lightning, like 5 minutes, but super powerful in terms of the content, all the way to breakout sessions. The topics was as varied as BStock migrations in some cases to AI, custom code extensibility, patterns and practices. So if you didn't manage to watch or you have one of those sessions that you want to rewatch, you can go to aka.ms/logicapps24/playlist, and then from there you can find all the sessions available. Pass it on to Kent now to talk a little bit about the next event.
Yeah, thanks, Wagner. So last week I had the opportunity to spend some time in Sweden, and it was a great event. It was the Nordic Integration Summit, and it was a 2-day event. There was 200 plus attendees, 94 organizations represented. There was 16 sessions. I was able to present 2 of them. One was a Gen AI Logic Apps keynote. The next one was more focused on Logic Apps roadmap. I was joined by some other Microsoft colleagues, and then we also had some MVPs and Logic Apps Aviators community members, Sandro and Steph Jan, demoing and sort of talking about Logic Apps and AIS. And so It was a great event. I do want to just acknowledge the organizers. You can see the picture there in the bottom left-hand corner. That's the organizers of the event. And then also the sponsors as well. So the sponsors showed up as well. And these types of events don't happen without this type of engagement. So thank you all for a great week in Sweden. And if you have the opportunity to go to this event in the future, I would highly recommend it.
Yeah, and we also had the chance to participate in the Prairie Dev conference. It was held in Winnipeg, Manitoba this year. As it's not that far from me, it was just a three-hour flight, and I had a great time. The great thing about this event is that it was not held in the winter, so then it was not that cold. But this conference is happening every single year, and it's a 2 days event. We had more than 40 speakers from the USA and Canada, and what was covered was C# development, API management, .NET Aspire, GitHub testing, Logic Apps, of course, where I had a chance to present a couple of sessions. One an introduction to Azure Logic Apps, and another one about generative AI in Logic Apps. There was a record number of 220 attendees, so the audience is growing, and it was a great opportunity to share about Logic Apps and Azure Integration Services in the prairies of Canada. Next one, please. Thank you. So, and then it comes with, we're coming here with this announcement of the public preview for the new actions for XML operations. In the presentations that I make, that I prepare about XML overall, I always start with XML. Logic Apps loves XML, and despite the growth and the how pervasive is JSON these days, we have that a lot of customers are still using XML, and because XML is still used in a number of industries, right? So it's everywhere too, in a number of legacy systems, and so we can see that the use of XML has not decreased in these industries. So then we are adding a couple of functions, one to parse and another one to encode or to compose XML documents, such that the users may interact with the token picker at design time. So in the past, XML was sort of a black box for the designer. So if we wanted to do something with XML, then we had to do it manually, and it was very cumbersome, and then it's not convenient, right? So then if we add a support that we have around the tooling on XML with the data mapper for maps and XSLT and the existing operations, transform XML and XML validation. So then this is, we think that this is great news for VSTOP customers and non-VSTOP customers that are using a lot of XML workloads. These tokens are generated from the XML schema provided by the customer, right? So then with this, we're making of XML a first-class citizen for Azure Logic Apps. So let me show you real quick how this works. Thank you, Wagner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you. So I have a few workflows here in this Logic App, and let's start with this one that is called demo. Well, let's start with the first one, demo XML. That has. Let me see. It has an HTTP request is received, right? An XML composed with a schema, which is the first action that we released for composing, and then the XML parse with the schema. In this particular case, I'm composing a schema that is coming. If I add, let's do it from scratch, right? XML compose. When I select XML compose with the schema, it's going to ask me for a source for the schema, right? Whether it can be an integration account or a Logic app, and I have to add the schema name. I have a lot of schemas here, so I picked the sample schema for simplicity. And then what it's going to detect, it's going to detect the routes, right? If I have multiple routes, then the routes here are customers and orders, and then it's going to give it a chance to either add item by item to the JSON schema or switch to an entire array. So this is very helpful when I just want to pass information. So I want to have an XML. An XML that is coming from JSON, for instance, right? So then, if if I select this choice of switching to inputs entire array. But if I want to add the values, I can do that individually, right? I can add all of them, and then the same for the next route, right? So a few things to mention here is that we have the support of multiple advanced parameters. We have to provide a root node qualifying name when you have more than one root, right? You kind of specify the date and time format to ignore certain characters, white spaces, and such. So then we have provided a lot of sub-features, so to speak, right, to allow customers to customize their XML compose solutions. One more thing, the XML parse with the schema, it reads the content and it matches with this schema that you have uploaded. There are a lot of properties as well that you can use. DTD processing is prohibited by default, but you can change it. Normalize XML, yes. Ignore white spaces and such, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run it. I think this one it doesn't require any payload. So let me just take a look at it. Yes. So if I go to the details of this workflow, in this workflow you will see that. Well, the first thing is that it did the compose. The output is going to be the XML that has been crafted by the input that I sent. That was sent, in the input parameters, right? So this is the XML, and then what I'm doing is I'm parsing this XML schema. You see here now it's parsed as JSON, and what I'm doing just to show that I can add one more value to. That I can select individual values of the JSON file is that I'm calling an API. This is a SOAP API that is behind API management, and I'm getting the orders for this customer. And then I'm getting the orders, a list of orders here, the result that you can see here. So if I go back to the workflow, then to the designer, and this is the part that I don't think I showed, right? I go to the token picker here, right? And I have the ability to select individual fields, which is something that per se was not feasible in the past. So one more demo that does the opposite. In this demo, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send a payload, an XML payload. I'm going to do the reverse, right? I'm just going to get the payload in XML, then I'm going to parse it, and then I'm going to compose a schema based on this payload. What I'm going to do is I'm going to paste the payload that I have here, go to overview, run with payload, and then I'll change the content type here to XML. Of course, XML, and then body, and then this is XML, and then I hit run, close, hit refresh, and then this is the last one. And then you see that what it did is it took the XML, right, in HTTP request, and then it sent it to the XML parse with the schema, and the outcome was a JSON file, right? So then the only thing that I did later then is just I composed an XML out with the outcome of this XML parse with the schema. So then does this replace the mapper? Definitely not. Right, but it gives you one more option to do customizations to individual values of JSON or XML documents when you are in your in the designer, right? So if you have a specific scenarios, like for instance, that require that you send XML data, then this is a fantastic solution for you because all of the data that we have in the designer, it's based on JSON. So then anything that you can do with JSON now, you do use operations in JSON, and then you use this action to transform it to XML and then send it anywhere else. Okay, and that finishes my demo. Thank you, Wagner.
All right, thanks, Harold. So let's now talk about hybrid deployment model. So this was something that was released last week. This was announced at the Nordic Integration Summit. And this allows you to go ahead and run your Logic App standard workloads on customer managed infrastructure. And so what we've done is we very deliberately called this a hybrid deployment model because that's what this is. It's a way in which you deploy Logic App standard. This is still Logic App standard. This is not a new version of Logic Apps. And the idea there is that you have now more choices when it comes where you want to host these particular workloads. Now, when we talk about customer managed infrastructure, that generally lends itself to being able to run this on premises, or maybe in a private cloud where a company might have outsourced, their data center operations to a local provider. Or this could also mean running in another public cloud, and you have infrastructure there, and you want to be able to run logic apps in that other public cloud. Now, we do target what we call a semi-connected scenario, and this is important to understand. What it means is that when you have your workflows and your logic apps, those will run locally on your compute. You will use local storage for all of your run history and persistence points as your workflows run. Now, in this case, the local storage is SQL Server. So you will be asked to provide a connection string to SQL Server in order for the logic app's runtime to store this data as it processes transactions. Now, by virtue of having local processing, local storage, local infrastructure, that also affords you the ability to connect to local network access. So you can go ahead and connect there without any sort of issues. Now, what's the flip side of semi-connected? The flip side of semi-connected is really like, okay, what are the pieces that need to be connected? What we do have here is the Azure portal, and the Azure portal will be used as your management experience. So we will continue to use the control plane that's hosted in Azure and then access the data plane through Azure Arc. So in this case, we can see the run history. That is a situation where the portal will make a query over Arc to the SQL Server that's running locally in order to return the records and the statuses from that perspective. Now, another aspect of semi-connected is connectors. So we do have in Logic App Standard these built-in connectors like Harold was just showing you. Those will run in your local runtime. So those do execute on premises. But we also have this very large library of Azure managed connectors that typically allow you to connect to different SaaS solutions. So for example, we have the Office 365 email, Microsoft Teams, we have ServiceNow, Salesforce, Adobe, and so forth. And so those are naturally cloud-based services. Those connectors do run in the cloud. So if you want to use those connectors, then naturally you need like outbound network connectivity for that to happen. Now, another sort of aspect that's worth understanding is deployments. Deployments do go through Azure. Basically, we have our control plane and our ARM APIs that live up in the cloud. And those deployments will then facilitate pushing your code down to the correct local infrastructure where it can then be utilized, for any sort of processing. So those are a few things that are worth understanding. Now, under the hood, and this is more of an implementation detail, is you are running these logic apps in containers. We are leveraging Azure Container Apps as a platform. And, as a result, we've got a connected environment, which is going to host these particular logic apps. As part of the public preview, we also did announce the billing model. And so this is something where we will charge you 18 cents per vCPU per hour, that's in USD, for running these particular transactions. And this was public preview as of last week. Now, we did run a private preview this past summer. We've talked with a lot of customers around this capability, and I would categorize the use cases into these three buckets. Number one is like customers that have local processing needs, and that typically involves BizTalk migration. In some cases, they have regulatory or compliance needs where they need to, continue to have these workloads remain on-prem. And then the third bucket could be more around, or the third item could be more around edge computing. So especially in situations we've got like manufacturing or maybe even retail, you do have local operations. And what you're really trying to avoid is dependencies on external network connections, such as the internet. So the intent here is like if your internet connection was severed, that you can continue your operations. And that's what our solution will provide you with. So what will happen is if the internet, connectivity did get cut, we would continue to process your transactions, assuming that you've got all of this network traffic handling or occurring over local networks. So that's kind of like the first bucket, and I'd say this is the most predominant, segment in which customers want to use this. The next one, and I kind of feel this is a little bit of the sweet spot, where customers do have workloads running inside of Azure, and these are situations where they would, ideally deploy to Azure first, but selectively take workloads and use them on-prem. And these could be more of those edge computing type of use cases. But when using this model, you get unified management. You're still using the Azure portal. You're still using the same dev tools. So it's not like your developers need to understand different ways of building these applications. And I think that's extremely important. And the third segment, and I think this is, a little bit more of the edge case, is like, there are some customers that do have multi-cloud strategies. Perhaps they have a subsidiary that's running in a different region. Perhaps they use a different cloud provider, and you still want to, once again, standardize on an integration platform and be able to use logic apps over there as well. Also, in some cases, you might have like line of business systems like ERPs, and you want to make sure that you can co-locate your integration platform close to those LOB systems. And as a result, you can go ahead and run logic apps hybrid deployment model near those line of business systems. And then also we've seen some interest from ISVs, people that build their own software and they want to package a integration capability as part of their offering. And they want to provide customers with more optionality in terms of where they go ahead and host those workloads. And so that's another use case for using hybrid. Now, the customer journey, this is really how you should think of this. The way you go ahead and develop your integrations is exactly the same. So whether that's VS Code, whether that's in Azure Portal, both of those models are supported. Now, what you would do is then think about, I'm going to save my code, my configuration in some sort of source control, and then incorporate my CI/CD deployment processes as part of that. And then it really just becomes a hosting decision. Am I going to run this in the Azure cloud where Microsoft manages the infrastructure? Or am I going to run this in a customer managed environment where we're going to leverage Arc-enabled Kubernetes as the underlying platform to support that processing? Now, regardless of which runtime hosting model you choose, you can bank on using the Azure portal and having a unified management and monitoring experience. So this is a little bit of a walkthrough of the provisioning experience. So if you go into the Azure portal today and you click on the create button and then you select logic app, you're going to see this experience. And really there's just a couple decisions you need to make here. The first decision is, am I going to use consumption or am I going to use standard? Now, in the case of hybrid, you have to use standard. And then it becomes a matter of okay, so I'm committed to logic app standard. Now, which hosting environment do I want to use? Is it a workflow service plan? Is it an ACE-v3? Or is it this hybrid? Now, in this case, we're going to choose hybrid. And from there, we go to the next screen. Now, this is kind of a fairly typical Azure screen where you're going to be asked for some details here, the Azure subscription, the resource group. And then what we're going to do is ask you for a connected environment. So you can think of this like a prerequisite where you've got a Kubernetes cluster, you've Arc-enabled that Kubernetes cluster, and then what you can go ahead and do is enable the Azure Container Apps, the ACA extension, and then be able to create a connected environment. The logic apps will then subsequently show up in that connected environment. So with those parameters set, you go ahead and click next. Here, we're going to ask you for some storage information, so that SQL Server string, and this is we're going to go ahead and use this for runtime support, but also the long-term retention of run history data. And then we've got the artifact storage. This is where you'll provide information related to a SMB file share, and we will use this file share to store your workflow.json, your connections.json, your host.json, and other artifact files. And we did this very deliberately, where there's a separation between the container image that is used that includes our runtime and the separation of your own code and configuration. And really the reason for this in part is one is just related to the Azure portal, where we do give you that experience where you can go ahead and author and update workflows in the portal if you wish. If that was part of an immutable containerized image, that would be problematic. And so that's a situation where that's why we've separated the two out. So you provide your storage related permissions or parameters, and then you have some options here in terms of networking and if there's any sort of restrictions that you want to impose. And then basically at that point, you click create and you would have an instance. So let's just flip over to the Azure portal and I'll just give you a little bit of a tour here. So what we've got is we can see it's a Logic App hybrid instance. And we will sort of have this tag called hybrid that just allows you for some differentiation. Now, the other things to kind of think about here is we've got this application URL. And if we click on this, we'll see that the function's runtime has been loaded. So that's good news. And then we've got a few other details here that will look a little different, right? So we've got a custom location. That really is like the Arc enablement of this service so that you know that you've got a location and you can connect to that cluster. And then we also have the connected environment, that ACA, the Azure Container Apps environment, where our Logic Apps will be hosted in. Now we can see here that we've got some, fairly common, constructs in our table of contents here. So we've got our workflows, our connections, our parameters, schemas, maps, and assemblies. And then below this, we do have our container settings, right? So we've got our containers where we can see the image, and we have options for scalability and secrets management, etc. So these are sort of what you would typically see in the ACA world itself. So we can go ahead and click into the workflows. Here I've got a few different workflows that are enumerated, and here we can jump into the designer. And when we use the designer, it's, this will feel exactly the same way as it does with Logic App Standard. We've got the different connectors that can be in-app or that are shared. And we can basically drag and drop those connectors and operations onto the screen and then basically configure them as we would see with any other Logic App. We can go ahead and run these Logic Apps. When we do have access to the run history, and we can see step-by-step how long each step took, and then also see the inputs and outputs as you would expect with Logic Apps. So that's just a very quick tour here. Now there's just a couple more slides and then we'll talk a little bit about AI. So this represents the feature set that is available now, as of last week. And you can see here we've got, the custom code .NET 8 support. We have support for your VS Code and Azure Portal. We are supporting semi-connected scenarios. We do have scaling that's available to us. And we did make an update to the SQL storage, the schema. And then we also have a billing model that's been introduced as well. We do have plans for a fast follow-up, and we will be providing what we call a refresh. And in this refresh will include support for the file connector. And then we've got these three items here: SAP connector, .NET Framework, XSLT, and .NET Framework custom code. With these three, there's an interesting dependency. That dependency is .NET Framework. With .NET Framework, naturally, it historically works on Windows machines. However, with Kubernetes, those are typically Linux machines, so we need to be able to support that. The good news is that the SQL Server team has solved this problem when they announced support a few years ago for SQL Server running on Linux. And so we've been able to leverage some of their technology to get this to work. So this is something that we are planning before the end of the calendar year, that we would be able to offer folks with this refresh. And then beyond that, it becomes a matter of customer feedback, and if there's any sort of gaps from a functionality perspective before we would go ahead and roll out the general availability of this offering. So let me just pause on this screen for a moment. We do have a blog post. We do have our updated content in Microsoft Learn, where we'll walk you through how you can go ahead and get this set up. But feel free to give this a shot, and then do let us know if you have any feedback for us, and we'd love to chat more about this with you. All right, so let's now shift gear a little bit and want to talk about integration and automation AI use cases. Now, this is a slide that's kind of a general Microsoft slide, And it's how Microsoft thinks about using generative AI to, benefit your organization. And there's kind of these 4 different pillars that we'd like to talk about. The first is increase employee productivity and well-being. And you could kind of think of this a little bit like Copilot and perhaps Copilot Studio, where you have these experiences tailored to the individual to help you accomplish tasks. Maybe that's authoring a document, maybe that's updating a document, maybe that's summarizing an email, maybe that's generating action items from a meeting, really focused on a lot of the personal productivity sides of things. Now, if we think about these 2 middle pillars, these are like ripe for integration and automation use cases. So naturally, when we talk about integration, it's very much focused on a business process. How do we integrate these different systems to unlock some capability as part of a business process that spans multiple systems? And then I think if we think about reinventing customer experiences, especially like customer support, integration usually plays a fairly significant role as you're integrating various data sources across the enterprise in order to provide a good experience for your customers. And then if we think about the 4th, this is probably maybe where it gets out of the realm of integration. This could be things like self-driving cars and like just are really highly innovative that are sort of just changing business models together. Maybe there's elements of integration, but I think probably more so the sweet spots are in the middle 2 pillars. So at the Nordic Integration Summit, I did have 5 demos. Now, today we're going to focus on 2, order processing and customer service. The remaining 3, I'll be sure to post on my YouTube channel, so feel free to look for those in the not so distant future. Now, the first one is related to order processing. And in this case, we've got a e-commerce company, and they're called Fourth Coffee, and they sell basically coffee to consumers, through like an online experience. And so we've got an e-commerce website. We've got Logic Apps that kind of sits in the middle. We will use Logic Apps to orchestrate this business process, which includes looking up a customer discount, then being able to generate some recommendations for what other coffee beans that this particular consumer might be interested in. And so in order to do this, we're going to take advantage of the large language model capabilities found in Azure OpenAI that's going to allow us to generate these recommendations. So if you're familiar with Netflix or Amazon, where they're always providing you with like recommendations on like what's the next movie you should watch or what are some additional goods that you should buy, you can kind of think of it like that. Now, in terms of all of the orders, our ERP, we're going to use Dataverse here, and then we're going to also provide communication to the customer itself. Now, we've probably talked about this before on these types of sessions, but we're talking about the RAG pattern and how we would go ahead and use Logic Apps as part of this ingestion process. And you can kind of think of it as 3 different stages. The first stage is collection of data. We need to collect this data from somewhere. And our connectors provide a great mechanism for doing that, whether those are files, like from your local file share, from OneDrive, from SharePoint, or it's transactional data from databases, or your ERP, CRMs, and SaaS solutions. We can connect to those data sources. Then the next stage is really around preparing the data. And so there's generally a few different techniques that you would use. One is parsing the document, and we've got a new built-in action that supports that. Then we want to chunk the document into like smaller, pieces that we can use to generate embeddings using the Azure OpenAI connector. Then we need to do a data operation to be able to map the embeddings to an index that is created inside of AI search. And then we can go ahead and use the AI search connector to go ingest to this particular vector store. Now, holistically, this is what the overall business process looks like. We receive an order. We're going to do an inventory check. If it's in stock, we'll see if we can apply a discount. Then we're going to reach out to the recommendations functionality, and that's where we will go ahead and query or retrieve from these recommendations from the LLM. And then we'll go ahead and fulfill the order. We'll then give the customer the option to accept our recommendations. and we'll naturally want to track that piece. And then we'll go ahead and ship out the goods to the customer itself. So I'm going to just flip over here to Postman. And Postman, we're going to have this send order. And I'm just going to create like a unique order number here. And we've just got some some header information about the customer. And then we can see the different types of coffee that they're going to go ahead and order. You can kind of think of this like, ground coffee coming in different packages. So we've got light roast, and we've got morning blend, and we've got medium blend. And let's go ahead and click the send button here. This will go reach out to that Logic app. The Logic app is now acknowledging and then basically saying like, yeah, we've accepted your order. It's being processed. Look for email updates, right? So let's head over to Logic apps now. And we can see that we've got this particular workflow where we receive this request. We send the acknowledgement back. We then go ahead and call the API that's going to allow us to establish a discount. And then, if there's a discount applied, we'll then go ahead and add those updated prices to the order. We're going to put that in Dataverse. We're going to then add all of the line items. In this case, we had those 3 different coffee. And then what we're going to do is create like a canonical order message that will pass on to a service bus queue. Now, with the service bus queue, we can now go ahead and dequeue this. And now we're going to do that RAG ingestion pattern, right? Where we're going to go ahead and, chunk the text. We're going to get embeddings, based on that order data. We're going to do mapping to that index that I talked about. And then we're going to index this document. And so the idea here is that we want to use data from previous orders to influence our recommendations so that our recommendations aren't totally random. It could be based upon other customers' behaviors and saying, hey, if you've ordered these before and you like them, then maybe you would like these additional ones because we've seen other customers use a similar buying pattern. Now, the next up is that we've got the fulfillment piece of the process, right? So we're going to, when we update the Dataverse table, we can now look for these updates and then be able to go ahead and process those. Now, when we get down to this step, this is where we're going to go ahead and call the product recommendation workflow. And I'm just using API management to extract some of those details. And if we look at that particular workflow, what we're going to do is we're going to, get an embedding, and then we're going to go ahead and search and get the chat completions. And this is probably the most important piece to this, is we're going to give instructions. And, you can look at this like our prompt, right? We're basically saying that you're an AI assistant with deep expertise in recommending coffee based on historical sales data. Then we want to be specific in recommending complementary coffee types that align with the customer's preferences based upon the order data. So this expression here is the order data. And then we can be very explicit on like how we want these recommendations to be generated, right? So we obviously don't want to include like existing coffee that they've already ordered as part of the recommendations. That'd be kind of embarrassing. And then we also want to include recommendations based upon Fourth Coffee purchases. So Fourth Coffee is our company. So we want to use our sales data because this is going to use a general GPT model. I think it's a GPT-4 model. And so we don't want that data, which is more public. We want it to be based on our data. And then what we're saying is we want at most 3 recommendations. And because I want a system to be able to receive these recommendations, I'm going to give it some explicit instructions on return it as a JSON structure that includes a list of products so that another system can read it and then call the list product recommendations. Because oftentimes you use like ChatGPT or Copilot, you're going to get like a narrative back, which makes sense when you have a human. But in this case, we have a system that is looking for these responses. So this is how we can go ahead and ask for it in that manner. So this is going to then return back those recommendations. And then what we're going to do is for each of those recommendations, get the product related information, like how much does this one cost? And let's grab an image for that particular recommendation. And then what we're going to do is construct an HTML table and we will send that out to the customer basically as a summary. So if we head over to our email client here, let's just do a refresh. Here we've got our request. And so we can see that here are the items that we requested. And we're basically saying, here's the details of your orders. These are in stock and will be shipped shortly. And then what we're suggesting is, here's a couple other products options that you can also go after. So dark roast and espresso roast. And then we have this button here that says, okay, like, do you want to proceed with these product recommendations? Yes or no. Now, the demo works a little bit better if we say order coffee. So we'll say yes. And now what this will do is we'll send that signal back to this workflow. And that will allow us to like record the fact that this was an upsell and that we basically can trigger off other processes to then go fulfill those recommendations from that perspective. Now, what gets a little bit interesting here is that we've now got the AI that is participating in our business process, and we need to be sort of aware of what it's doing. Like, is it actually recommending good options? Are people taking those options? Are they actually going for it and actually upselling and purchasing these additional recommendations? So one thing that we can do is we can use business process tracking to help with this. And so let's just close this one. This was the order that we recently had. And we can see here that we received the order, and we can see the data that's related to that order. We can see that it was in stock. We can see that there was a discount applied. We can see that we've got recommendations provided. It was fulfilled, that they did request the upsell, and that we've now gone ahead and shipped the order. So obviously, if we would have paused and looked at this sort of while this was going on, we would see, the stages kind of build up from that perspective. Now, if we go ahead and make this filter, expand this filter, we can also see situations where we've got a failure. And in this case, it could be a situation where they declined the upsell. And in this case, maybe it's not a failure, but it does represent a situation that we would want to track so that we can then evaluate, hey, like, how good is our recommendation engine? And then maybe we need to make some tweaks to the prompts so that it's more specific or it addresses the needs from that perspective. So this is just a good example of how we can actually use generative AI to actually help generate more revenue for our organization, and then how we can use business process tracking as a way to help measure the effectiveness of the AI, which I think is pretty cool. All right, so let's talk the next demo here. And once again, folks, if you have questions, feel free to put them in chat. Now, we did use this a little bit. This is the retrieval side of things. We did use this when it came to the recommendations, where we were asking for basically, recommendations. And you can kind of think of that as like a question. We prepared a prompt, and then we were able to get an answer. And once again, like, these questions can come from multiple sources. I think historically, if you look at a lot of sort of the examples that are out there in the wild, it's usually chat, and which is fine, where there's a human that's asking these questions. But the one thing I would encourage you to think about is it's not just humans that can use this, it can be systems. And that's what we did here. It was a system that said, hey, here's some order data, give me some recommendations, and then basically give me that response back. Now, we can do something similar as well when we talk about this next particular use case. So this use case is related to product returns. So we've got a customer that is requesting a refund because there's a damaged product. Now, in this case, it could be, they've received some beans that have a tear in the packaging, and it's like, hey, I want a new one, or I want to return this because I'm not comfortable with this. And so this is a situation where we could, receive a refund request. I'm going to show you Postman, but more realistically, this could be email, or this could be through that e-commerce website. And then what we can do is we can actually use the LLM and pass the image along to the LLM, and also include the customer history for returns, and then ask the LLM for a recommendation. And so if this is kind of interesting, if you think about, being more efficient with your employees' times. like, let's just say that it takes, I don't know, half an hour for a human to investigate a return. And then you can start to think of like, well, how much would that cost in labor to go do that? Now, what if someone actually has a request for a return that is like half the cost of what it would cost you to have a human look into it? Does it make sense to spend twice as much money to go see if this is a legitimate refund? Or is it better to just refund it and let the AI give a recommendation on whether you should or not? Now, you can create those guardrails that say, hey, here's the thresholds. Like, have they done this previously? Is the value more than X? And give the large language model some parameters that they can work within, and then only escalate to a human when it makes sense to go ahead and do so. So let's flip over to let's go back to the Azure portal, and we'll look at this. We've got this process here. Let's just go to the designer. We've got a product return. So we're going to get a request over HTTP. We're going to get the image off of blob storage. Now, this is just a demo, but more realistically, this would come from an email. And then we're going to go ahead and call a child workflow that's going to just return the history for that customer, right? So that's this particular workflow. We're just going to go ahead and query for returns, the returns table based upon a particular email. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and pass that information into this Azure OpenAI get chat completions. So once again, we provide instructions like your AI assistant that determines whether or not a return should be accepted. And then supplier, okay, let's just jump ahead here. The return needs further info. Okay, if there's a history of too many returns, then basically we're going to decline it. And then we pass that customer's return history here. And then basically if you don't see, if they've returned more than 4 times in the last 6 months, then it needs to be reviewed by someone. And so these are kind of the guardrails that we're imposing the AI and how it should respond. And then what's kind of interesting is we can take the recommendations, and these can be fairly verbose. And then what we can do is actually pass that output back into the get chat completions and then ask for a 1-word response. So it's kind of like a summary of the recommendation, because it's going to be pretty verbose. And sometimes you want to include that info, sometimes you don't. But for us, we do want to be able to make a condition. And naturally, if this was declined, this is where we would then loop in the human. So it's pretty cool that you can use AI to summarize AI, which is kind of interesting. So let's go ahead. Let's head over to Postman. And we've got the, here we go, product return coffee. Now, just give me one moment here. I'm going to show you what these images look like. So we've got like the first image, and this is going to be when we've got like damaged packages, right? So we've got a damaged package where we can see the coffee beans exposed. That seems fairly legit that we should go ahead and accept that as a return. And then we've got another sort of scenario where we're trying to send us some peanuts, but we don't sell peanuts. So naturally, we wouldn't want to auto accept that one. That wouldn't make sense. So here what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and submit the coffee return based upon this particular email address here for Eugene, who's fictitious. But we'll go ahead and submit this. That'll call that workflow that I just showed you. And then we're going to see a recommendation coming back. Now, here we go here. So this is kind of interesting. So it says that the image shows that the package was damaged, which is a valid reason for the return. However, the customer that's identified by that email has a history of multiple returns within the last 6 months. Specifically, there are 6 returns. Therefore, the return needs further review to determine the pattern of returns is excessive. So like this would be that branching logic where it's like, okay, now we loop a human because we want to make sure that this isn't fraud. Now let's take another scenario where we can just, let's say, just put in my fake email address here, and we'll hit send. And once again, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take that same coffee package and we're going to say, hey, should we be able to return this? Now it does once again indicate that it is damaged. and the product has been compromised. It aligns with our policy of returns, and the customer's return history is empty, meaning no previous returns, so no further review is required. So this might be a situation where it's like, let's automatically return this because like it sort of fits within our parameters, and it's a good use case. It's a good business case to auto return this. Now, if we go ahead and then use the peanuts as an example, let's go ahead and submit this, and we're going to pass in that peanuts picture, and we don't sell peanuts, so why would we go ahead and return this? And so this might be a situation where you do like cover this scenario and say, oh, we don't sell peanuts, so like your return has been denied. Or maybe this is a case where you do loop in a human and they would then sort of validate this. And what gets interesting about these scenarios is as you encounter more of these use cases, more of these different scenarios, you update the AI to accommodate those, so that it only becomes more and more accurate, as you move forward. So I hope that this kind of provides some inspiration on how you can go ahead and use generative AI with Logic Apps to sort of reimagine or enhance the business processes that do exist inside of your organizations. Now, here's a great way to get started. We did recently introduce our template gallery. If you go into the template gallery, you can go ahead and provision these patterns, the RAG pattern. And what we do is we have a variety of these different data sources. Could be Azure files, could be blob storage. I think we've got SharePoint in here. And you can quickly go ahead and ingest this data. And then we've got, the sample, templates that you can use for retrieval. And those are situations where you can easily go and get this, up and running in less than an hour, and then be able to explore and see kind of where you can use this. So that's my content. Wagner, was there anything questions-wise here?
We had one question from Dick Baker, right? But I think it was not necessarily about the technology. On the customer return scenario being shown, must customers send damaged goods back, or should it be the keep it case, right?
Oh yeah, I think
yeah,
very
are company policies, so we would be able to implement both.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And Harold, I saw that you put like a comment on the chat as well, related to the if you're passing legacy files.
Yeah, that is correct. So the parse that we have doesn't operate with VSON files or with binary files. So if you need to do written ingestion, so then you have to switch to the offline parser that we have for host files. That one works for these hyper legacy files, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And we have Ahmed joining us today. He was talking about he's saying like really, really good examples, and the good thing of test passing some project sign-offs and statement of works to get patterns about estimation, bottlenecks in projects. So that's a really interesting use case. As an ex-consultant, I definitely could see the advantage of having that first pass.
Yeah, I like that, and I think that's kind of how people should think about this. Like, you think about busy work. Sometimes it's not the most enjoyable things that you have to go through, but it's kind of part of the deal. And what's kind of interesting about this is you provide the guardrails. So you give the criteria for the AI, and then it can make a recommendation. And I think it's a matter of one of those things where, you probably want to monitor it, and you can use human in the loop to say, hey, my recommendation would be this. And then you can have a human that goes back and says I would agree with that. And then you can do this reinforced learning loop where you then continue to update your guardrails. And then over time, the idea is that you can kind of automate more and more things and still have some level of governance behind it. And I think that's where Logic Apps shines. Obviously, the run history, we will tell you exactly step by step what happened. And then I think the business process tracking complements it quite well, where you can get more of that summary level view, and naturally you can expose that out to other stakeholders, that might not have access to like the run history, and you can consolidate and aggregate that info as well. So yeah, thanks, Ahmed. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And like looking at some of your examples, I like totally threw the product manager hat and started to think about the solution architect. There is so many places that we could go and grow with that, right? So in the cases where you don't have the stock, you could use the same level of recommendations, but just get like a additional or optional things. So you still try to upsell even when you don't have the stock, and things like that. It's like the sky is the limit on that.
Yeah, you can also use it to like forecast like how much stock you should reorder too. So based on like historical, month over month examples from the app. So, yeah, I think the sky is the limit. And I think the goal here, once again, is just to inspire people to start thinking a little bit differently, and certainly as you're building these interfaces, is thinking about, hey, how could this be like improved for using AI? And I always like to think about this as kind of, there's two levers you can pull. One is like, how do you sort of generate more top line revenue? Like, how do you grow revenue? And that's a good news AI capability. And then the flip side of that is like, how do you improve your bottom line revenue as well? And that becomes, how do you reduce costs? And so, when you're evaluating these different use cases, try to think of it from that perspective. Am I going to capture revenue, or am I going to lower costs? And then find, what's right for you and your organization.
Exactly. And as Harold coined it first, and then we shameless steal, innovate where we integrate, right?
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, amen. You innovate when you integrate. You don't innovate in the corners, right? In the endpoint, you innovate in between. Right? The best place to do it, and I think Logic Apps is the best position to do that work.
Exactly. I think there was one more comment that just arrived. Yeah, I think it's that Dick Baker is talking about like what is the truths and pros and cons on that, right? I think it's adding that idea of including the AI to do some work actually is going to help us to accelerate the results, and then even avoid fraud, right? He was talking about like is it like a horse trading poacher, right? So that the whole idea here is if the AI can help us to detect some of those things early, then we're going to have a lot more advantage instead of having to keep our employees having to do all of that filing and manual work.
Yeah, for sure. You gotta put in the guardrails, right? So
yeah,
and then
because you could look up. The flip side is like, yeah, you can create aliases, but what about the shipping address, right? So there's we just did the order history by email address, but it could be by shipping, could be by credit card. Obviously you can use other constraints that are sort of tougher to replicate as well.
And this can be a great case for a combination of deterministic and non-deterministic, right? So to some degree, you can also define your own rules with Logic Apps or the rules engine, right? Deterministic in a deterministic manner, and then combine them with what is coming from AI, right? I think for some will work, right? Non-deterministic, 100%, but some others might want to enforce some criteria that they have incorporate criteria also.
Yep.
Yeah. So similar to the other one, the sky's the limit on that one because you have both sides, you have both tools on your toolbox to play with, and you select each one is better applied to specific use cases, to specific scenarios. Cool. I think we are at time. There is no other comments here. Thank you everyone for that joined. Thanks for all the comments and the discussions. And See you guys next month. One detail before we go, because next meeting would be on 27th of November, if I'm not wrong, the last Thursday. What's going to happen is that around that time is going to be Thanksgiving, right? So part of our team is not going to be available. We're moving that to the first Thursday of December. That is going to be our last session of the year, right? We're not going to have a session in December, and we're coming back at the end of January. So,
All right.
with
Well,
that,
thanks everyone. Yeah, thanks for joining us today.
You guys take care. Bye.
see you all later.